over. This area is really down, but that's, yes, truckers working on trying to live.
Is Serena coming?
Yes, she'll be here. Well, need somebody to tell me what to do.
So the bottom really kind of colored all of these pieces. Just so we can come back.
Probably won't have hardly anybody today because they scared everybody again. Well, news channel saying this is trying to create another virus, but this is another virus, but it's so weak this one.
Oh,
trying to start us up with a new virus, see if they can help us.
Sorry to hear about your sister, but thank God she.
Well, when her husband passed away, he was dying of cancer, ex-army captain kind of thing,
Yeah.
tough guy, when, I guess you know, you get face guy.
Yeah.
My niece called me, who is Tina.
Right, right.
And I told that thing to the doctor. Said, that, hey, somebody on the deathbed, they can't talk, get them, put your hand in, squeeze your hand, yes, don't squeeze, no, you understand me, I'm talking what I'm saying. And she did that with him, and he squeezed her hand, and she said it was like, he had an expression on his face, and so she did the same thing with her mom. Mom was more awake. She said, I did the same thing with mom, and mom said yes. So, yes, whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
So I can only take it as that.
Yeah.
Hope and pray.
Oh, sad about brother David.
Yeah, he's
24.
24 years. He's had a lot of problems. He's anorexic. Keep him taken crazy. I understand 24 is your son, you know, they're missing and all. But just wouldn't work, wouldn't do anything. And David was like, I'm doing this. But I'm sorry, I can't answer it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Daddy got a
I-
child?
spiritual, but
Did he have any other children?
yes, he has a daughter.
They have to believe. Doing all right, where's Jesse?
She said, we're thinking about asking you to do the funeral. Well, he said he wanted me to get, whatever you guys want. She said, well, we're looking at pictures.
Never heard of
I'm
such.
shopping for a house. Like, okay, whatever you guys want. But, hey, David's, I can't get him in church. He'll send the offering in, he'll, you know, call me, talk to me, pray with me. He'll get him in church.
That's the fellow back there.
Does he live very far away? Or live very close?
I led his sister to the Lord before she died. He called me, he said, come over and talk to my sister, you know. And she had, I forget what she had, but she went into the hospital about 2 months after that.
Hey, Jesse.
She wanted to talk to me.
Yeah, this is Chuck here, he's trying to lie for you.
Did you mean what you did? She said, yeah, with all my heart. I said, okay, then you're saved. Now, what God does with this child, I can't tell you. I don't know what the Lord's trying to do, but to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord now. So we have a promise that if something happens and he takes you, you're going to be with him. Not only be tougher than him, but
You think it's COVID or something? Has he been any?
his son,
No. David,
No.
because he didn't know why.
he said he's a part of his church for almost 3 years and sends his money in like clockwork according to Steve.
Hey, are you good?
Wow. Takes all kinds. It's given to them.
Yeah, I get it from him, huh?
Where's your husband at in class?
No, sir, he is.
Dragging behind them. I don't know. When you talk to Miss Pam, something about Michael Evans, I'll get it straight once she gets here.
He's not doing good?
Now, somewhere he went in some church in Brazil, and people there knew Dr. Ruttman, didn't know Michael was the second. Pam just called
Thank you, brother, I appreciate it.
Oh, at church,
I've been on my heart now, I finally got the one, now I wanna do the key change, and I can't figure out the next one yet. I'm just working on it a little bit at a time. I love that song.
The Gethsemane Quartet.
Oh,
First time I heard it.
really? Oh, my.
So,
I heard it back in the sixties.
oh, wow. This would have been the 70s. All right, turn me on. Give me some power. It's 10 o'clock here at Anchor Baptist Church. Come on in, let's get a songbook. Turn to number 49. 49. Let's all stand. Jesus, what a friend for sinners. Jesus, lover of my soul. Friends may fail me, foes assail me, and my Savior makes me whole. Hallelujah, what a Savior. What a friend, saving, helping, keeping, loving. He is with me to the end. Jesus, what a strength in weakness. Let me hide myself in Him. Tempted, tried, and sometimes failing, and my strength, my victory wins. Hallelujah, what a Savior. Hallelujah, what a friend. Saving, helping, keeping, loving. Is with me to the end. On the 5th, Jesus, I'm due now, receive Him more than all, in him I find he hath granted me forgiveness. I am his and he is mine. Hallelujah, what a Savior. Hallelujah, what a friend. Saving, helping, keeping, loving, is with me to the end. Amen. Have a seat, Brother Chuck. Yeah.
All right, morning, everybody. This will just be a continuation from last week. We're actually going to skip a few years. But I did come across and have some notes on how quick the church grew, okay? The idea was the Roman Empire, I've been telling you along the lines, is they got afraid of the Christians because they were growing at such a fast rate and were taking, so many of the pagan places were collapsing on themselves because of lack of people coming to them because there was so many Christians. And I kind of put this together to give you an idea how quick the church grew. I keep bringing up that quote from Tertullian about the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So the church started out just like we read about in Acts 1:8. Church started out as a city movement. It says, "But ye shall receive power. After that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and into the uttermost parts of the earth." So it started out in Jerusalem, in the city. And it started out with 12. And then it went to the countryside. We read in Acts 1:15, it says, "In those days Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples and said," the number of the names together were about 120. So just in a few years that it started, it went from 12 to 120. Then Paul mentions it in another number in 1 Corinthians 15:16. He says, "After that he was seen above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep." So by then it had gone to at least 500 because it said 500 brethren. And then in Acts 2:41, Peter was preaching and it says, "Then they gladly received the word, were baptized the same day that were added unto them 3,000 souls." So it went from, the 12 to 120 to 500 to 3,000. And then again in Acts 4:4 it says, "Howbeit many of them which heard the word believed, and the number of men were about 5,000. So it's steadily growing. That's what I'm trying to get to you. And I found a note in one of the history books that said the church, it spread from Jerusalem to Antioch to Egypt to Africa. And by 300 AD, the size of the church had reached 75 million. 10% of the Roman population. That's why they were afraid, is because 1 in every 10 people was a Christian. And back then, it took a lot to be a Christian. So you weren't just saying you were a Christian. It's not just in name only. You were doing the deed, and it was costing people's lives. But that's pretty, like I said, that's a pretty well a growth spurt. So like I said, we're going to be skipping a few years into the future. It's after the time of the Roman emperors that we looked at last week. So this week I was going to talk about the Crusades. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but so what were the Crusades all about? Well, in all honesty, when I was reading all these histories and listening to these people talk, it's not any different than what wars are about today. It's the same thing. What they're trying to do is they're trying to build a kingdom on earth. And Christ is, well, we're going to get to those verses in a second. But a little background, the Muslims had taken all that ground in the Middle East around Israel, and around Israel and Jerusalem, and the Roman Catholic Church wanted it back so the Pope could set his throne up there, basically, is the truth of the matter. And the Muslims wanted Jerusalem because in their folklore, it says Muhammad had ascended to heaven from there. So it's their third holiest city on their list, behind Mecca and Medina. The Catholics wanted Jerusalem because they recognized it for what it was. It was a place God had given to His chosen people. And the Catholic Church believed they were God's chosen people. So that's why they wanted it. But what none of these groups understood is that the land was given to the Jews. And God may have set aside them for a short period of time, but it's still their land. It's still God's land. And He gave it to the Jews and nobody else. So with that little bit of background, we can start looking into it. Let's see. Again, that verse that talks about God setting the Jews aside is in Romans 11:25. Let's go there real quick because I can't. For some reason, I'm very nervous this morning, and I can't get it off the top of my head. It says, "For I would not have you, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceit, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in." So they're only set aside for a short time. So all these groups that claim they're Israel, Armstrong was a big one, claiming that they were the new Israel and all that. And I'm not going to go into all that, but anyway, they wanted to build a physical kingdom down here on this earth, a literal kingdom on earth for God. But the problem is nobody reads their Bible. And they don't, even if they read it, they chose not to understand what it was saying. Christ told Pilate in John 18:36, He said, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, and I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not hence." So he told Pilate and told everybody that would read the Bible that the kingdom of heaven isn't yet. It's not the literal kingdom on the ground yet. Christ will have a literal kingdom on the ground one day. And that's what we commonly call the millennial reign. He'll reign for 1,000 years on a throne in Jerusalem. But right now his plan is that there's a spiritual kingdom here. He's gone home, and there's not a literal physical kingdom on this earth now. Romans 14:17, Paul said, "For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but is of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost." So it's a spiritual kingdom right now. That's why our warfare is not physical warfare. We fight with and I'm ahead of myself again, but we're fighting with the spiritual tools, fasting, prayer, sword of the Spirit. All those are spiritual. And the only way to get into this kingdom of God, the spiritual kingdom, is what Christ said in John 3:3-5. You have to be born again. You have to be saved. And that's how you get into the kingdom of God on the earth right now. The problem was with all these totalitarian groups, they're all trying to bring in a literal physical kingdom on earth. All totalitarian groups are bloody killers, every one of them. Doesn't matter if they're communist, socialists, Roman Catholics, Muslims, it doesn't matter. Nazis, all of them, they're socialists. They're all totalitarian groups. They're all looking for a kingdom on this earth. And that kind of brings us into the Crusades a little bit, because that's what those were about. They all reject the Bible, and because they reject the Bible, there's no recourse except to fight in this physical realm. Our warfare is not physical in nature. Ephesians 6:12 says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And according to 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but are spiritual. Okay, there it is. All right. I keep wanting to jump ahead because I got these verses floating around in my head, and I got to just kind of try to stay with my notes, and hopefully it'll make sense. But in a general study of the Crusades, in general, the Crusades lasted about 200 years, and the number of actual times varies depending on who records it, okay? But most of them will give you 5 Crusades plus, well, they'll give you 6. Some of them will give you 8. But most of them give you 6. And you had 5 Crusades with soldiers or people fighting them. And then there was one that was called the Children's Crusade, which is really a sad one. That happened between the third and the fourth one. So there's really 6, but there was a few more attempts later. Now, the other thing is there's 3 different areas that these crusades happened in. One was the one that we're going to talk about today and deal mostly with the Muslims. And when I say Muslims, I mean the Turks, the Moors, the Arabs, there's another group, but it's those people. That's the crusade I'm talking about, the one that happened in and around Jerusalem. There was also another one. There was a crusade that was sent against the Germanic tribes and the Slavs in over southern Germany and in southern Russia. And then there was a third crusade, which was against our forefathers, the Albigensians, the Waldensians, the Cathari, who the Roman Catholics called heretical Christians, okay? But the one I was going to focus on today was the ones that were over around the Holy Land, around Jerusalem and in that area. Let's see. The main reason, you do understand, it's not different in any aspect of life, but when people say something with their mouth, it's really, and give you some kind of reason for something, that's usually not the reason they really mean. Okay, and I've seen it runs through work, it runs through churches, and it runs through the Crusades too. They said the Crusades were about, what would happen is there was a lot of quote-unquote Christians, which are Catholics, were trying to go to pilgrimages to go back to Israel and to Jerusalem. And the Muslims would steal from them and pillage them and do all these kind of different things that when you have that area under your control, men do. They're just doing what man did. And you have to understand, there's a difference between spiritual and religion, okay? Or true Christianity and religion. Religion has to see things. It has to touch things like idols or beads or, have a ruler sitting on the throne for them. Or in the Muslims' case, they pray 5 times a day toward Mecca. It's all physical for them because they're not spiritual people. They're religious people. And it doesn't matter. Religious people, they have to have those things. They have to have icons. They have to have places. They have to have see idols. It's all sight for them because they want a physical kingdom on this earth. We have a spiritual kingdom. We look toward heaven, That's not to say that if I had a chance, I'd probably go on a tour of the Holy Land, quote unquote Holy Land, if I had a chance. I'm definitely not going anytime soon, but, that holds because there are places in there that are talked about in here. That's why it's important to me. But it's not a place that, like Roman Catholics, that's one of their things, is they're supposed to make a pilgrimage. Muslims make a pilgrimage. At least one time in their life, they're supposed to make a pilgrimage to those cities. And it's because they got religion. They don't have salvation, And so, like I said, it's that's what this was all about. When you look at history all the way through it, it doesn't matter if it started at Cain and Abel, James 4, 1 through 3, it says, "From whence comes wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lusts and war against your members? You lust and you have not, you kill and desire to have, you can't obtain. You fight and war, yet you have not because you ask not. You ask not, you receive not because you ask amiss, that you consume it on your own lust." That's the story of man from the beginning. That's why Cain killed Abel, because Abel had something that Cain wanted. He wanted that affirmation from God, but it's all the same. Anyway, so what they said, what they claimed were the reasons. They wanted to protect the pilgrims and rescue religious sites. Part of it was economic. The years preceding the Crusades, there were famines throughout Western Europe, and they wanted to open trade routes with the Near East, so that was part of it also. There was also a certain amount of men being men, going along with what James says here. They wanted to set up their own little kingdoms, their own little fiefdoms. They wanted more land. The way it was perceived back then is your status was viewed to how much land and how many serfs and how many slaves and how many this and that you had, okay? So they wanted to plunder the Muslims. Basically, the Muslims had plundered the Jews, and now they wanted to plunder the Muslims. That's what men do when they fight. Let's see. And then there was a small group of them that were just adventure seekers. And some of them, that's the way they got out of prison, is we'll let you out of prison if you go fight in this crusade. And if you live, then you'll be free afterwards. Okay, so that's what was kind of happening around there at that time. The First Crusade, most histories credit Pope Urban II, or his real name was Odo de Langdey. That's why I guess he changed his name to Urban. But he made a speech at the Council of Claremont that promised that Christians making pilgrimages to, they called it Palestine, safe passage, and promised to help liberate Palestine from the unbelievers. He promised all the people that took part in this crusade would receive a uncorruptible crown for taking part in marching against the Muslims. So what happened is that took off in different phases. They really didn't have their act together. There was one group led by a man named Walter the Penniless. He was the first to answer the call. His group, there was an unknown number, but it was in the thousands, 10, 12,000 or something like that. They marched through Hungary. Most were cut to pieces when they tried to conquer Belgrade on the way there. Part of the survivors ended up starving in the forests, and a few made it to Constantinople. And then after that failed, there was another group that was led by a guy named Peter the Hermit. And Peter claimed that Jesus had appeared to him in a dream and given him a letter to give to the Pope, and that he was supposed to lead the People's Crusade. Some called it the Peasants' Crusade. He had about 40,000 in his group. You know, they basically followed in the footsteps of the first group and they had about the same results. More of his group made it to Constantinople, but he was told at that point to wait. I think according to most of them, they said that he had about, 10,000 people with him still after. Started out with 40,000. By the time he got to Constantinople, he had about 10,000. And they were told to wait for better reinforcements, before starting the attack. European barons were promised to come with better troops, but Peter pressed on, and they lost another 3,000 men. So he went back to Constantinople and decided to wait for the next group to come. They had a bunch of these people all there in Constantinople waiting for this next army to arrive. And the next group came was about 15,000 men, and they left for the fight. And over 10,000 of them were butchered in Hungary. And what was happening is, you got to remember, this is a lot of people, 20, 30, 40,000 people. And you got people, Peter the Hermit and Walter the Penniless, leading them. So you know that they're not provisioned very well. And what's happening is that they go through and they're on their way, they're pillaging towns and causing destruction and, just trying to steal supplies to make it to fill the Pope's request to fight in the Holy Land. And that's what was happening. There was a large amount of, if you think about it, how many supplies it would take to feed 40,000 people. Well, and they already were subject to famines and that type of thing. So that's why the places on the way there killed a lot of these guys, is because they were pillaging their towns and destroying them. After that, a large army, this is all still part of the First Crusade, a large army, an actual army of over 80,000 troops arrived. There was supposed to be 12,000 knights, 70,000 foot soldiers, and they were led by a man named Godfrey of Bouillon and Raymond of St. Gilles and a few others. They ended up actually taking some of the cities back. Okay, they took back Nicaea, and that was in June of 1097. They got Antioch back after a 7.5-month siege in 1098, and then they took Jerusalem in July of 1099. There was so much atrocities that went on. I guess these people were just so sick and tired of not fighting and seeing all their people killed, on the way there and stuff. That they just killed people that they had taken captive. They slaughtered them in cold blood. Saracen women and children were decapitated, and disemboweled and thrown over the walls of the cities. A quote from one of the witnesses at that time said, "They scoured the streets and the alleys, the gardens, courtyards, breaking down doors of houses and mosques and killing all those who fell in their path, no longer just soldiers who were being killed first, but the civilians, men, women, children, and old people." They said the Jews were shut up in their synagogues, which was then set on fire. The entire Jewish community of Jerusalem died there. You have to remember that Jews were also considered heretics by the Catholics. So these people, when they went there, they slaughtered everything. You know, it was a bloodlust. But the one thing it wasn't quick enough for Urban. Poor Urban, Jerusalem was taken, and just 2 weeks after Jerusalem was taken, he was trying to make plans to go to Jerusalem, be able to sit on the throne, and be there just like the Antichrist will be there in 2 Thessalonians 2:3. But 2 weeks after they took Jerusalem, he died. So there was a vacuum there for a little bit, and what happened is Godfrey, the man that led the crusade this last time, he set himself up as king in Jerusalem. Again, men, they want a literal physical kingdom down here. They want to be power. They want, they're no different than those Roman emperors that wanted power at any cost. All right, so that was the first one. And then the Second Crusade was started in 1147, and it was by two kings in France, Conrad III and Louis VII. It didn't really do much. By all accounts that I read, it was considered a failure. They attacked two other of the main cities, Damascus and Edessa, but famine and fever, and the enemy prevented them from capturing either one of the cities. So they did absolutely nothing. All those people they died for nothing. Later, in 1187, Saladin took back Jerusalem and a lot of the Palestine area, and that set up the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade was called the King's Crusade. The purpose of the Third Crusade was to recapture Jerusalem from Saladin. Its only achievement, it captured two cities on the way, Acre and Jaffa. And also, well, I guess three, because Ashkelon, I guess they were together. But it never did take Jerusalem. This was the part that most people are familiar with, that Third Crusade, because it had people in it. Richard the Lionhearted, Richard I, a guy named Frederick Barbarossa, and then Philip Augustus of France. Although Philip never made it to the battle because him and Richard got into a fight and Philip ran home. But they never did take Jerusalem, but what they ended up doing was they signed a treaty with Saladin to protect the pilgrims as they traveled. Okay? They never took the city. All right, so up next is the one that really, it kind of breaks my heart. It's referred to as the People's Crusade or the Children's Crusade. It's described by most of those people as the most tragic of the Crusades. It happened at 1212 AD. It was started by a shepherd's boy from Chartres, France, and he concluded that God wanted him to lead thousands of European children to the Holy Land. He was supposed to go down to the Mediterranean Sea, and in his vision, he saw God opening up the Mediterranean Sea and then walking across on dry ground the way Moses opened up the Red Sea, or God opened up the Red Sea for Moses and going across on dry ground. So that's what he did. And that that French boy was named Stephen, and he led a group from France on the way to Rome or to Constantinople. There was a German group of children that was led by a boy named Nicholas. They went across southern Europe in Marseilles. The group that left from Marseilles was about 13,000 kids. By the time they got to Italy, they were supposed to board boats, and it was down from, say, 20,000 children down to 7,000 at that point. So they boarded 7 boats, and they were headed to North Africa. And I guess from North Africa they were going to go, supposed to land there and then go to the into Palestine from there. 2 of the boats wrecked on an island in San Pedro. The other 5 ships did make it to Northern Africa, but what they found out is the people that headed that crusade up for those children sold them all into slavery to the Muslims. I mean, it's like I said, it's heartbreaking. And, you know, needless to say, it was a fiasco. Many thousands died from war and hunger, and those were the lucky ones. The ones that didn't die got sold into slavery to the Mohammedans and were never heard of again. Pope Innocent said, he had a quote about the Children's Crusade. It said, "While they rushed to the recovery of the Holy Land, we slept," or sleep. "They put us to shame." So, you know, the children, you know, what he was trying to do was spur another crusade. He was trying to get people to have a guilty conscience, say, well, the children are doing this and we're not doing anything. But he wasn't doing anything either. You notice none of them guys ever did any of the crusading themselves. They just sent other people to fight for them. The one thing I did find interesting, or at least it was interesting to me, is, you know, at the very beginning I said history is written by the victors, and in this case the Roman Catholics. So what they did is, in their histories, they changed the fact that it wasn't a Catholic young boy. They said it was an Albigensian young boy that led all these children down there to their fate and got captured and put in slavery. I thought that was interesting. You know, that, you know, they write it the way they want it to be, I guess. The Fourth Crusade lasted about 4 years, from 1200 to 1204. Didn't accomplish much, but it did see that the city of Constantinople was taken back from the Muslims. Rome set up a seat there, and the end result was that the Greek Orthodox Church was subject to the Roman Catholic Church for about 60 years. The Fifth Crusade, this is the one, was headed by a guy named Frederick II in 1229 AD. Now, Frederick's, you know, he was a humble guy, right? But he named himself Stupor Mundi, which meant, I didn't write it down because I thought it was so stupid. But I remember his name. Oh, the wonder of the world is it's what he used to call himself. Okay, he was that humble. He never did fully recapture Jerusalem, but the end result, they divided the city between the Muslims and the Roman Catholics. This group, and so he would have made William Jefferson Clinton very proud with his two-party, you know, his two-city system there. But that didn't work, okay? And it wouldn't have worked now, and it'll never work because it's the Jews' land, and nobody can ever get that through their head. But the problem was Frederick, you know, like I said, he was so humble. He crowned himself king of Jerusalem in March 19th, 1229. And the Pope got so mad because he wanted to set his throne up there that the Pope excommunicated him. And then right after that, it didn't last very long. The city of Jerusalem fell back into the hands of the Saracens and then later to the Turks. So it just never, when you try to do something that God's not behind, it's going to fall apart. The final attempt for the Crusades, there were several. like I said, it depends on how you number them, but they happened between 1248 and 1270 AD, and they were led by Louis of France. They failed to capture Jerusalem. It was just, like I said, it was a failure. And then Pope Gregory the X tried to start a couple of more, and they all never panned out either. All right, so that's basically the history of that crusade against quote-unquote Holy Land. A lot of things were romanticized about that period of time. One of the things was Robin Hood came about that time. It depends on what you read. They still don't really know exactly who he was. He's supposedly is a legendary, heroic outlaw, originally depicted in English folklore in something they called ballads, which were, I guess, like stories. And so he appeared in them in that literature. I know they've had at least 5 or 6 films, and I think even recently 3 or 4 of different things. According to the legend, he was a highly skilled archer and swordsman. In some versions of the legend, he's depicted as being of noble birth. And in modern retellings, sometimes he's depicted as having fought in the Crusades and returned home to England to find his lands taken by the sheriff. The oldest versions that were the English ballads, like I was telling you about, he was just a member of the lower class. It was a thief, basically. Tradition depicted him and his men that gathered around him in the forest green. He robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. But none of that stuff, it's all romanticized is the word I used. None of that stuff, if you see it happen on TV, it probably didn't happen that way, okay? It just, another thing that's played up that came out of this this time in history was there were 3 different military orders of knights that were created around this time. The Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights, and the Knights of St. John the Hospitaller. The Knights of St. John the Hospitaller were the first of the 3 orders formed around the time of the Second Crusades. They were formed supposedly to help pilgrims as they went on their pilgrimage to Israel. The group made up mostly of horse soldiers from France. According to history, they were courted by popes, they were made rich by kings, they were idolized by people, and they came to their end around 1500. Now, I'm not going into all the conspiracy stuff behind this, okay? If you want to look it up, I'll give you the references. You can, especially the Knights Templar. If anybody's watched, what? Yes, National Treasure, Knights Templar. Yeah, but thank you. But anyway, the Knights Templar were also called the poor Knights of the Temple of King Solomon. And I guess that was too long, so they shortened it up. It was founded around 1118. They derive their name from being headquartered in and around Jerusalem. That was a time when they actually still had control over Jerusalem. Most of their order was taken from the area near the Rhine and Alsace-Lorraine. They grew to about 9,000 members. They were dissolved in 1312 because they were dabbling too much, according to the French politicians, they dabbled too much in French politics. In 1307, the King of France, Philip, set out to destroy them. He had many of them jailed. Those that weren't jailed were run out of town. Shortly after there, Pope Clement V added to it by orders that the knights, if they be found, be persecuted. They were accused of spitting on the cross, worshiping idols, and other offenses of moral decency like sodomy. In 1312, they were abolished as an order, They had all their property confiscated and split up between church and state. Again, romanticized history, the story, and this was supposed to be historic, whether it is or not, I don't know. A couple 100 years after, so around the 1600s, there was another group of men that were the King's Guard that were treated almost the same way. And that's where you get the story of the Three Musketeers from. Anyway, all of these are all romanticized by the movies. And the last one's the Teutonic Knights. This group was not really used in the Holy Land, but was almost exclusively used in that other crusade I was telling you about, where for Germany and the southern part of Russia. That's where they fought. They fought the tribes in Germany, and it was known as the Knights' War. They found their end again in the 1500s. So how or why did the Knights become so romanticized in the historical writings? So during that time frame, during the Middle Ages, the economic and the political system was based on something called feudalism. And feudalism was basically set up with a king and royalty at the top, and followed by the lords, then followed by vassals, and then you had the peasants down on the bottom. Knights sometimes were landowners, but not always. But they were above the peasants. They usually had the title of Sir or Lord. But they were rich enough they could afford a horse and armor plating and a sword. So they were definitely above the peasantry. The Catholic Church was, again, looking for a kingdom of heaven on the earth, and they were using these knights to bring it about by the point of their sword and their lance. I guess I'll do this, but the last thing that is romanticized about this period is chivalry. And I know that, at least from my generation, when you think of chivalry and that kind of thing, you think of laying your coat down for a woman to walk across so she doesn't get her foot muddy, or opening the door for a lady, that kind of stuff. Well, chivalry originally was a warrior's code, and the latter appropriated by the knights to include duty to protect and defend anybody that was opposed, or not to defend, but to defend the church from anybody opposed to the church. And I'll finish with this, the 10 Commandments of chivalry. It says, number 1, thou shalt believe all the church teaches, and thou shalt observe all its directions. Number 2, thou shalt defend the church. Number 3, thou shalt respect all weaknesses, and shalt constitute thyself the defender of them. Thou shalt, number 4, thou shalt love the country in which thou was born. Number 5, thou shalt not recoil before thine enemy. Number 6, thou shalt make war against the infidel without cessation and without mercy. Number 7, thou shalt perform scrupulously thy feudal duties if they be not contrary to the laws of God. Number 8, thou shalt never lie. Thou shalt remain faithful to thy pledged word. Number 9, thou shalt be generous and give largesse to everyone. Number 10, thou shalt be everywhere and always a champion of the right and the good against injustice and evil. Well, number 10 is contrary to number 1 and 2 and 3. It's just, again, all this stuff's romanticized. Some of those are good character traits. They're found in the Bible. But, and what men love to do is they love to give other men that are fighting for them a cloak to hide behind so that they can be villains or, I mean, not all soldiers that go to war and stuff turn out to be like these guys were. You know, some of them do have ethics and codes of conduct and that kind of thing where they won't cross. But it's just, you know, just remember that all of these things are romanticized. And, you know, I mean, I like the old Errol Flynn Robin Hood, okay? I like the old Scarlet Pumperneck, whatever it was. But, you know, but all those, they're all romanticized about men and all of these men, their sole goal was to build a kingdom down here on earth. And that's what I took away mostly from these crusades and this study in church history, is that they, you know, men will do what they can do, and they'll do everything they can do for something down here. And we're supposed to be the opposite. Our hope is above. You know, we're supposed to put above, you know, our treasure up there. We aren't supposed to be trying to heap to it down here. And that'll finish up. We got about 10 or 12 minutes. I think next week you're going to do James.